Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about...
kids in gaming.
Yes.
And then kids become teens in gaming. And then adults in gaming. Hopefully.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to my humble childhood.
Well, before you do that, we have done a couple episodes talking about... Well, we always talk about our kids. Or our kid and our friends' kids and our nephews and all kinds of people's kids. But somebody asked me at the latest convention, suggested that we do an episode on kids in gaming and
Right.
how it's important to get kids to play games, especially if they're your kids, so that you can help them to develop in different ways, right? It helps them to, there's lots of things that helps them to develop. So we thought we'd just talk about that. We've talked about it a couple different ways in other podcasts, and I don't remember which ones, but I know we talked about psychology.
Right.
And so if we go over some things we've already talked about, please just
bear with us.
Yeah, there you go.
So I will say that I started gaming when I was a kid, right? Almost everybody plays games. Candyland is actually the very first board game that I remember playing. It was obviously a long time ago. And I started playing role-playing games when I was 11 because my brother was talking about it when he was in high school. And that was Dungeons & Dragons. And I wanted to play. Because he described it to me. I was into like fantasy kind of stuff. You know, everybody... It was after Star Wars had come out, and I remember being in the backyard with my friends pretending we were Luke Skywalker with lightsabers with sticks in our hands and having duels and stuff. So kids play games anyway. Now, whether you want to use, whether you want them to play role-playing games and board games like the hobby has now, you know, that's up to you. But I think there's some positive aspects when you have children playing games, you know, especially with the family. And we've talked about it before, but I think it's good to reiterate some of the stuff that we've learned since our son is now an adult legally, supposedly, and he actually, this last convention, he could have stayed home and done other things, but he actually wanted to go to the convention with us and play games with us and other people that he meets at conventions. So along with that aspect of having a long life hobby of playing games, there are other things that as a child and as a kid and as a teen, when you're playing games, whether role-playing games or board games, that there's skills that you develop. And I think that's an important thing that some people may not realize.
Well, yeah. Kathy and I were talking about this just yesterday because we were together, and we were talking. The boys were playing actually DDO online, Dungeons and Dragons online,
DDO.
And they were playing with Felipe and Dawn, and I think Mike was even on there briefly. But I don't know if you ever found them in the tavern where they were, or
I don't know. He had to go take his kid to something.
And Kathy goes, "See, we must have done something right. They're playing with our friends online, and they're both 18, and they're like, okay, we're gonna make characters." And they were talking, we're gonna make characters so that we can play with the guys, and they're not gonna, because they usually mini max everything, right? They go, we're just gonna make a regular character so they don't think that, you know, we're trying to overpowered.
And then they're helping them make characters, which is kind of funny.
So now the kids that were sitting on our laps when they were little, wanting to play with the big boys, now they are playing with them, and they're helping them make their characters online.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. So
that's one aspect, right? That
I never even I wasn't there for that conversation. I must have stepped out. But you're right. That's what does that say? You know, when you have your kids playing with their uncles.
Well, some people would say we ruined our children.
Yes, but I think if you look at it try to look at it objectively, right? You know what the hobby gaming industry does for kids or children is pretty important. I think there's some lessons that we can learn. There's skills that they pick up and they hone from playing games.
Well, a couple of the things that Kathy and I have always said, and you and I have talked about this before, the boys playing role-playing games not only taught them morals, because you started out with the troll that, was like, big and ugly, but maybe you didn't want to kill him because you might need to help him, right?
Right. Or he wasn't really evil. He was just lonely kind of thing.
Yeah. So you can teach kids morals that you want them to know when they're starting school. And as they're going through school, there's a lot of things that kids deal with, especially other kids at school who
Right.
they may or may not like. They may get along with. Some kids might try to bully them or different things like that. Well, role-playing games give them a chance to learn all that kind of stuff in a friendly place and to be able to explore their imaginations. And they see, and I was telling Saul, one of the things that I think is good about role playing is whether you're a kid or an adult, you can come up with crazy ideas, right? And you can share them with the group. And maybe your friends are going to ridicule you about it. That would be crazy. But maybe one of them is going to go, oh, "That's a great idea. Let's try it." Right?
Right.
So you can, and you can do it in a safe place where you know all the people. So if they do say, "Oh, that's crazy," that kind of thing, you're not going to feel bad about it.
Right. I think, I hadn't thought about that. I think you said that a long time ago, but I haven't thought about it. I didn't put it on my list of things, of skills that playing games does. Now, this is for both role-playing games and board games.
Yeah.
We play both. So I have a list of skills that it hones is critical thinking, right? Any time, whether it's a role-playing game or a board game, well, maybe not the way I play board games because I just play from the gut, as I say. But some people actually think about what moves to make. And there's different types of games, and some are more critical thinking than others. There's Ticket to Ride. It's not a lot of critical thinking. Then there's something like
Lords of
Waterdeep, or even more complicated, something from like on a
Galaxy Truckers,
on a distant plane. Something that's a little bit more war gamey ish. So critical thinking, thinking about what the cause and effect of things are, and if you do certain moves, what's going to happen, the cause and effect, and all these other things that happen. And sometimes, critical thinking isn't really taught in schools. I mean, unless you go to
college.
And if you take that class. So I think board games do represent, and role-playing games represent situations where you wouldn't be in a normal life. Being assaulted by 5 orcs or being in siege by an army, or whatever it is, makes you think a certain way, and this usually makes you think outside the normal realms of what day-to-day stuff does. But sometimes it does happen that you need that skill.
Well, yeah, in real life, I think just as a caveat, when you teach your kids board games and you play board games with them all the time as their kids, and you're giving them these chances to hone all their skills, once they reach a certain age, you're not going to be able to beat them at these board games any longer, which is very frustrating sometimes because we've been playing Lords of Waterdeep, which is you can play, one of the reasons because you can play with 6 people. And we have at least 6 people most of the time to play.
Right.
And Augustine and Alan beat me every time now. I used to win that game quite a bit with it just between the 4 adults.
Right.
And sometimes when the kids were playing the first couple times they played it. But since then, if those 2 want to play, I know I'm never going to win because they're both like totally thinking it through, and they've learned from Steve and some of our friends and
they just
people
developed themselves.
Yeah,
right.
they've got these ideas to think 3 or 4 moves ahead, and which is a chess thing. You've taught them, and now they beat you.
Right.
So you should be very proud of that.
Well, the game Euphoria, right? There's a game that I've never really grokked in a certain sense. I mean, I know if you get the Euphorians and you try to get those guys, but the whole idea of
getting on all the markets and getting your stars down.
The engine of getting the
mechanics
of it down. I just kind of play willy-nilly, but my friend's kid, Alan, and then our son, they've developed a skill, and they're much better than I am, and that's fine. And then, in fact, that's something that you want to happen, right? When you teach your kid to play a game, just like you said, and they become better than you because of whatever, because they're more critical thinking, because they've been thinking critically from a younger age than I did. Right, I would play Candyland till I was probably 7 or 8, and they started playing. What is it?
Ticket to Ride.
Ticket to Ride and stuff like that, and then they got more and more complicated much sooner at a younger age. I mean, they were playing Euphoria when they were what, 11 or 10, 12. So when that kind of stuff happens, the brain, especially kids growing up, brains, they really, their
synapses start firing.
Yeah, they're firing in
all 8 cylinders.
All 8 cylinders if it's a V8, right? So critical thinking is a very useful skill to have, and I think both role playing games and board games do that. And we don't even really play really complicated games. I mean, there's some games out there. I mean, if we were playing miniature war games or something like that, where you really have to develop tactics and all that stuff.
We did play Gaslands. Remember when Ian went with us,
yes.
Or Ian met us there, and we played Gaslands with these people. And Ian and Augustine loved it. They got out their little measuring sticks. They're not actually rulers. They're different templates that you can do. And they took to that stuff, and I'm just like looking at it because it's a spatial game, right, where you're trying to get around the cars and beat everybody.
Well, it's a race game for one,
right?
And then you can shoot each other again as the other thing.
So, but for me, it was all the little templates. I'm all, oh,
yes.
This is a spatial thing, and that's not Jolene's best thing. It's like playing Star. What is it? Star Truckers. Which is?
You just said it a little while ago.
Starship Truckers?
Galaxy Truckers.
Yes. You have to make that ship, and you have to do it when everybody's sitting there, and I have a really hard time with it. The guys are like making these great ships, and I have, my ship looks like crap because I can't.
Apart.
Yeah.
So another thing I thought was socialization. Even though people think that people who play games are nerds and antisocial for whatever reason, it is, and I mentioned this when we were recording live at the Dundracon, yeah. We just went to a convention 2 weeks ago. Socialization. I think people have this misguided think that people are nerds who play these games and then they're antisocial. But when we go to conventions, there's people out there who they approach our table and they're very friendly. And we even ask them if they want to play a lot of times if we're starting out or something.
If we're aware they're standing behind us.
Well, yeah. Or they'll ask and they'll be like,
yes.
Yeah. And we've had people we didn't even know sit down and play. We've had many games, and in fact, we've developed a lot of friendships at conventions, right? We have just, I don't know, I'd say hundreds, but yeah, we have hundreds of people we know that I consider friends that.
Okay, you might know hundreds. I don't know all those people.
You know quite a few, though.
I'm going the 20s to 30s. But,
okay, that's still a lot of people.
That's not 100.
Well, I'm a little bit more curious. Maybe.
Well, it is a lot of times when you do go to conventions, you do see some people who are socially awkward, but everybody is socially awkward in some way, right? You don't want to talk to people you don't know. There's that fear factor. You're going to ask if you can play a game and they're going to go no. And I always feel bad because sometimes we usually have a full game and people will come up and go, oh, can I play? Because I see you're setting that up. Do you have room for another person? And I'm like, no, they just all went to the bathroom. I'm really sorry.
Right.
Come back. Maybe I would give up my seat, but then I wouldn't get to play any games.
Right. But it does happen quite a bit that people ask to play.
And like this last convention, I got to teach or refresh people's memories on Istanbul.
Oh, yeah.
And that was fun because, we got to play with different people that hadn't played the game before.
Yeah.
And it was fun.
There, in fact, is a little bit of a socialization. Is teaching somebody. That's a skill that requires all kinds of different other skills, right? Teaching a game, thinking in a certain way, being able to convey the properties of the game or the elements of the game, and so on. So I think there's a big misnomer or big problem with people saying that people who play games who are nerdy are antisocial, but that I don't think it's true.
No, it's not true. Especially people that play role-playing games. I mean, there's stores and stuff that people go to specifically so they can meet new people to play games with,
right? So
that they can make, get to do different things. So it's definitely not antisocial.
Well, if you think about it, the Stanford group is everybody I met going to because of games and going to conventions.
Yes.
All of them.
Yeah. So when the kids are playing games at conventions or, at a gaming store or with their friends and their parents or their cousins and stuff, they're learning those social skills, right? How to, especially board games, how to be a gracious winner and a good loser, and how not to be mean to people.
Right.
That
and
kind
take
of
your
stuff.
turn and all this, and don't talk over other people and all these things. And if you're a bad person or a not a bad person, but if you're rude and stuff, people wouldn't want to play with you, right?
Well, and then if they're their family, they're going to tell you that you need to stop doing that.
Okay, so let's go on to something else. Reading comprehension.
That is a great one, because when the boys wanted to learn Pathfinder, which was the game at the time that was out, Saul said, well, I guess I can run a game for you guys, but you guys really have to know the rules, and you don't read yet. To 5 and 6, I think they were 5 because they were in first grade, and they're both in October, so they were 5 and 6. Those two took to that Pathfinder book like there was no tomorrow and figured out those words.
And yeah, it was amazing. I think they were in first grade?
First or second, yeah.
First grade. So there were 5 or 6?
Uh-huh.
Oh,
or they might have been 7 because they were early. So
right, and that was weird because like some of the words in those Pathfinder books, I'm sure my son didn't know exactly what they meant, but he would come up against a word and then look it up in a dictionary and then find.
No,
out.
he would ask.
Oh, he would ask.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't remember all of a sudden. I remember him like all of a sudden I
their vocabulary expanded greatly.
There's that, and then he's like making a character. I'm like, wow, okay. I guess this is happening sooner than I thought. Because I thought I had a couple of years left to goof off.
You guys don't really read yet. I'm okay.
Yeah, that was funny, and you're right. I think, and because he was playing games and stuff like that, I remember, I forget when it was, but I just noticed that the vocabulary of both our sons, of both Alan and Ian, Alan and Ian too, but Augustine. Their word usage was much different, much more advanced than I remember with other kids or even me at their age. So reading comprehension is a big part. So role-playing games, for the most part, are pretty complicated. I know now you're getting role-playing games that are 1 page or 2 pages, but the traditional role-playing game is a big tome of a couple hundred pages, and sometimes they use weird words and represent complex situations and complex actions. So of course their reading comprehension as children is gonna go up, and that's something that's lifelong, right? You're gonna once a word goes into your vocabulary, it's in that bank of words that you use, and it gets in. And if they continue playing role playing games, it gets even more and more filled with these words that. It's good to know.
Not only that, but it goes back to the basic fact that if you have a kid and I know a lot of people talk about baby talk, right? Where they're trying to teach the kid to talk, but not really, because they're making sounds at it. Whereas with Augustine and Alan, I still remember when they were like 2 or 3, their favorite word was actually, because I think Saul or Kathy used it quite a bit, because they would always go, actually, and then they would say something. Maybe they weren't exactly on to what the actually was, but they would, interject it. So when you're talking to kids and teaching kids games and playing role-playing games, you're treating them as if they're an adult at the table, right? And the more you do that, the more sophisticatedly is not a word. The more sophisticated their speaking and comprehension and the way that they interact with people around them is going to be.
Well, I remember our friend's wife, Kathy, she was a 3rd grade teacher, and she came over one day and was playing with, she has a daughter who's a little bit older than her son, and they came over, excuse me, and they came over and they were playing in our house, and the kids were, and we were talking, and then she started talking to Augustine, and then she kind of shook her head, and her eyes bulged a little bit. She goes, wow. He's, this one he was really small. I forget how old he was, but he goes, he really his vocabulary is really good, and he's talking in complete logical sentences, and she was really impressed. And I'm like, yeah, I we never really baby talk to him, because the problem with baby talk is that they'll try to mimic what you're saying. So that's why I think sometimes kids have a harder time learning to speak because they're mimicking you going. It doesn't make any sense because you're not really saying anything. Anyway, so yeah, so the vocabulary is going to be much more expanded or extensive than people who than kids who are not exposed to that kind of language.
So gaming is good for that because, especially with rules, because you got to teach the rules, so you have to explain all kinds of things to people.
Right. So then another thing is I was thinking just shifting away from those skills is this lifelong hobby, right? We've been playing games since we were kids, and I never stopped. I think Jolene might have not played games when she was a late teenager. I don't know. Did you ever stop playing games?
I've never stopped playing games. I didn't always play. I mean, the board games but mostly card games because my grandparents, both sets, really liked to play Pinochle and Rummy and stuff like that. So I've always been playing games since I was a kid.
Yeah,
and expected to know what a run, a set, and all that kind of stuff was, and being able to play Pinochle and cribbage and know what you're doing when you sit down at the table, whether you did or not. That was a different story.
Well, like I said, I grew up. I'm the youngest of 9, and my next oldest brother is 5 years older than me. So I was always trying to catch up with them, and I always wanted to try. I was always that little kid brother that I want to play too. I want to play too. So unlike most, well, I don't know if it was because my parents said, you gotta play with them, right? Or what it was, but they allowed me to play, and so I was playing poker. And I've mentioned before, I was playing poker when I was like 5 years old, and though I didn't know the odds of drawing a card that completed your flush or your full house and all that stuff, I didn't really know that, but I knew the hands and I knew which ones beat which hands and all that stuff since I was a little kid. And I remember we lived out in the boondocks kind of, and I mean this is the 70s, so there was no cable television. Once the shows went into reruns, there was nothing to watch since we already watched everything, and there was no syndication at the time. So in those end of the season of TV nights, there was absolutely nothing to do, and at night in the middle of nowhere, you played games with your family. And I remember at the dining table, and we had a formal dining room. We lived in this nice ranch house. And I remember the room would be packed with people, and we're playing poker, and we're playing for pennies, right? Everybody would be throwing and we would run around grabbing pennies, and I'd steal pennies from my parents, and we played poker, and then that developed me for liking to play games. I think, especially because it was like, I was being a big kid or an adult or adult like, and I think I look at my son. I remember years ago. We were at the convention, and we had already met Larry, and we had played Larry, in the middle of the night. And he saw my son, and my son was small. I don't know how old he was, like 5 or 6.
Probably, maybe a little younger.
And he goes, oh, I introduced him to Larry, my son to Larry, and Larry goes, do you want to play a game, Augustine? And he goes, yeah, sure. And he played Poison with him, and he absolutely loved the game, and he learned how to play it. And I think that and then after that, my son loved Larry because Larry treated him like a person instead of this. He didn't treat him like a little kid and go, oh yeah, I don't play with little kids. Here's this. He must have been in his 50s or 60s, and he's playing with my son. And then he played with my other friends' kids, and they loved Poison. Poison is actually a really fun game.
And he always introduced him to the games like These Nuts.
Oh yes,
and games that kids would like.
Yes,
right?
Yeah,
and teenage boys.
Yeah, he had a pretty good idea of what kids liked, and who knows? I don't know what it was. He was very intuitive with children being able to figure out what would be entertaining to them. So,
of course, he didn't always speak. He wasn't his language wasn't PG, but that was okay. The boys didn't mind.
And it's not anything they hadn't heard at like the schoolyard,
or from their mothers sometimes when they're driving.
Well, that's not they're driving. So So what happens? So we as an adult develop a really good relationship with our friends at cons, like Larry, and there's a whole bunch of other people that I know that we see all the time, Jonah, and other people, and what's not strange, but yes, even children that go to conventions and they keep going as teenagers, and so on. There was this very young lady that we met when she was 11 at Dundracon, and she wanted to play board games with us, and I'm like, well, I don't know, but she was like super whip smart as far as playing games. She introduced us to like Shadow Hunters. She was playing, I forget what other game she played that she taught us, and she played Ticket to Ride, but she also played more complicated games. And year after year, she would go out to the convention, and we'd see her, and let's play games, and we kind of adopted her.
And the boys loved playing with her because she was a girl.
Yeah, there's that too.
Who was just a little bit older than them. So,
yeah, I guess she is a little bit older than them. But so they develop a friend, and now when they go,
we still play with her. At the
in
convention.
fact, this last convention, she was there, and my son and his friends were like playing games with her, and that's pretty neat. I think that says a lot about conventions, but that also says a lot about playing games, that you can develop friendships with people that you just play games with and you see every once in a while, and I think that's pretty neat. I think, your shared interest in playing board games and games can make lasting relationships in that sense, and it's not based on what's your favorite football team, or based on what other criteria you have out there that you make friends with, how you make friends. It's kind of weird how you make friends, but I think this is one way of a very kind of intellectual way of becoming friends with people, is that you play games that are not necessarily easy. It's not Tiddlywinks. It's not Candyland. It's because they're complicated and they're make you think. I think that's an interesting way of developing friendships over that kind of.
Well, a lot of people. I was thinking about that show that we watched a while ago, where they were. I think it was World of Warcraft, where it was a guild. I'm not sure if it was really World of Warcraft.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Remember the show? And I remember Augustine going, "That's like me and my friends because we're not a guild, but he plays with kids from middle school, grade school, and then the people he met in high school, and then other people that he just met online." So, but there's an online, kids playing games online, because that's what a lot of them do these days, especially if they're, I don't know.
Especially after COVID.
Yes.
You were stuck at home for 2 years or almost 2 years.
So you met a lot of people online that way, right?
Yes. And you play with them online, and that's what we did. We shifted all our games online. Even board games you can play online.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. And so he has friends that he knows only through playing games.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird and strange, but pretty cool at the same time.
So I don't know if we actually answered any questions for people about playing games with kids, but we told you a lot of stuff about our experience with playing games with kids and how it helps them to develop.
I think there's all kinds of benefits of children, and then teens, and then adults. They grow into adults just like we are. That happened. But what is interesting is that people talk about. I don't know where I've heard this mentioned, but I heard it is that families that eat together stay together, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess the whole idea is that there's a time, if you make time once a day for people to, or at least a few times a week or whatever, to be together and talk to each other and communicate to each other, then the family is better off that way. You're closer together, you're closer knit and stuff like that. But I'd suggest playing the game with your family and playing games with your kids, because this last convention we went to, Dundracon, my son was 18, right? He could have stayed home by himself. He could have decided that, no, I'm going to go to the movies with my friends. I'm going to go do whatever he could have done. He could have stayed out. But no, he actually asked, or actually wanted to go to the gaming convention and went with us and played games with us and played games with his friends that he knew at the convention. So that idea that families that play together stay together. I mean, I use that kind of like whimsical, but it's true. I think we meet. Our friends' kids went to the convention. when we go to conventions, I remember little kids that other couples and families took, and now they're adults now, 18 and in their young 20s. And I just, Jacob, I think is a kid's name. Well, he wasn't a kid. He's not a kid anymore, but he was there with his family, and this is a guy that I knew as a kid. He was a young teen. I don't think he was even a teenager. He was in the preteen when I met him, and now he has a family, and he brings his family. I don't know, his children are really young, but he likes playing really complicated games, and he likes playing role playing games. But his family was there, and it's interesting, and we'll see if his family his kids will play games, stay interested in playing games. So, we when you go to conventions now, I was gonna say, it's much different now than it was when I first convention experience at 16 when I went to PacificCon. There was no children, right? No children. There was hardly any women too. But now I see whole families, and you see the families grow up, and if you go to conventions, I've been going to conventions since Dundracon since 92, I think 91, and 92, and you get to see this. You get to see this families going to conventions as young families, and then and then you see them. You see the kids who are now adults still going with their parents to play games, which is amazing to me.
And as Ian told me at this last convention, some of these people have known me my whole life. And I'm like he goes, it's really weird sometimes because I've seen them every single year and they have known me my whole life. And I'm like that's pretty cool. He's like, I can talk to him now because he's 21. He'll be 22 this year.
Yes.
And he goes, I can talk to them, but when I'm talking to them, I realize that they've known me since I was a baby.
That is amazing. You're right. I remember him saying that.
Yeah.
I was there. And I think that's neat. I think for him, it was like that realization that, that I don't know what it was.
There are all these adults that he knows that he's been playing games with his whole life. And he realized it was like a epiphany, as Michael would say.
An epiphany, yes. So and that tells you that going to conventions and playing games centered on this convention the convention is centered on playing games has an effect on your kids, and
yes.
So, and in a positive way. I don't think there's anything negative about the situation. So teach your kids to play games as children, and
hopefully they'll play games with you when they're adults.
Keep playing with them when they're teens, and you'll find them probably playing games when they're adults with you. So that's pretty cool.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.